Anyway, before we do the actual practical stuff, Claire and I just wanted to give you some overview of issues in developmental research. Anybody here is planning to do something developmental? Children, adolescents? Oh yeah, a couple of hands going up. So for you, it's obviously you might have some experience, and all of what I'm saying here is old news. For the others, hopefully you might get inspired, you might get ideas. So maybe we can tempt you into doing some of that stuff as well for your PhD. Well, this is what I'm going to talk about this morning, hopefully very quickly. I'm going to talk about theoretical issues or considerations if you want to do developmental research, some methodological issues and considerations, and very quickly, because Julie talked about that already in her session, ethical considerations. Now to start off, doing developmental research is a real pain. Probably all people here who have done that can agree with that. It's much, much harder to test kids, adolescents, older adults than normal adults from the student population. So please, think very carefully whether you actually want to do research with children or whether you actually want to do developmental research, because it is very, very time consuming. And these things here probably everybody mentioned so far in their presentations. Before you do developmental research, have some sort of theory of why that is important. So don't say, oh, why don't I do my study with children? That could be kind of cute, could be kind of fun. No, that's not a good reason. Have some sort of theoretical reason. Why should you look at children? Why are older adults interesting for your theory, for your project? Just because it's fun or because nobody has done that before is actually not a very good reason. Have a research question, very important, and have hypotheses that you can actually test. If you don't have any of these before you do a developmental research, you are wasting your time, you're wasting participants' time, you're wasting parents' time, school time. Don't do it. Now, as the name implies, developmental research is about development. It's about change. What we are interested in when we do research with children, adolescents, across development is we are interested in change. How do people change across the life? How do certain abilities change across life? How does thinking change across life? So developmental research is about change. Now again, if you say, if your research question is, I think that children are different than adults, like duh. I mean, you don't have to do a research study on that. You have to have a clear idea of what you think is changing over development, how it is changing, and why it is changing. So when you think about developmental research, think about, these questions beforehand. Think about what you want to look at, how it might be changing over development, and why you think or why you're expecting changes. Now, how do we actually study change? Probably the gold standard type of study in developmental research would be a longitudinal study. So longitudinal study means that you look at the same individual or the same group of individuals at different points in their life, at age 1, at age 2, at age 3, at age 5, at age 16. So you kind of follow individuals across time. This is, I think, the only type of study that really allows you to look at change over development. Longitudinal studies are very hard to do. Obviously, they take a long time. There's very little funding unless you are in a really, really big consortium or kind of government agency, or you are associated with some sort of sociological research. Then it's probably impossible to do longitudinal studies right now. For you all doing your PhD, I would not recommend doing a longitudinal study because it will take up most of your time, and that's really not worth it. Now, a type of subgroup of longitudinal studies are microgenetic studies. When you do microgenetic studies, basically what you say is, okay, I expect there are some developmental changes at around year 1. I don't know, language learning, word learning. You would say, okay, I expect that children learn words when? When do we start learning words?
Saying or understanding?
Saying?
Saying around 18, 24.
Okay.
It's very variable.
So 24 months you believe that children will utter their first words. So you would test kids at 23 years, 12 months, and 360 days. So every day you would look at the same child and see how many words they say they can understand. So you have like very short-term longitudinal studies. We call those microgenetic studies. So that's possible to do that, especially when you look at a very specific ability. And what that tells you is how does change occur in a very short time span. So that's possible, but otherwise I would not recommend doing a longitudinal study in your PhD. What most of us, and actually what most developmental psychologists do, is cross-sectional studies. Cross-sectional studies means that at one point in time you look at different groups of people. 6-year-olds versus 12-year-olds versus 16-year-olds. Okay? And you compare these groups of people, so these people differ in their age, and you compare them on a specific behavior, specific thinking style, whatever, and you see whether there are differences between them. Cross-sectional studies, well, are easier to do than longitudinal ones, but what the problem is with cross-sectional studies is that they are quasi-experimental, which means that you don't put people randomly into age groups. You don't say, you are 6 years old, you are 16 years old, you are 12 years old. People cannot decide what age they are. They are the age they are, okay? So if you get differences between age groups, we all assume, yes, there is an age difference, but the difference could be due to all kinds of other things. The school people go to, the cohort they are from. So actually, cross-sectional studies don't really allow you 100% to test for age differences, but it's a good approximation. So this is what most of us do. Very importantly, cross-sectional studies don't look at developmental change. What you can test with cross-sectional studies are developmental differences. You can say 6-year-olds are different from 16-year-olds, but it doesn't tell you anything about how this change occurs. So it's not about change, it's about developmental differences. And when you write up developmental studies, some editors and some reviewers are really picky about that, so keep that in mind. I always get that feedback, actually. Types of change. How does change occur? How do people change? How do abilities change over development? You might want to have some hypothesis about that, because it does tell you what kind of studies you want to conduct, and it might also tell you what kind of age groups you want to look at. So, is the change linear? So if you think that on the x-axis here we have age, does the ability linearly increase with age? Is there some non-linear relationship between age and the ability that you have? Is there something like a step or a stage difference? These are kind of the things you want to consider beforehand, because it kind of determines what kind of age groups you also look at. So for example, if the ability that you want to look at changes like that, and you sample an age here and an age here, you might not get any significant age differences there. So think about the changes you expect and how the ability that you're looking at might be changing over the lifespan. It's important for how you actually pick the age groups that you're interested in. Now, in terms of any questions on that so far? Okay. Now, methodological or practical considerations. How do you actually do developmental research? What should you think about besides your theoretical consideration? Age groups I just talked about. Think about the changes or the type of changes that you think is happening. Again, if you think your ability changes like this, it's probably best to sample an age group from here and an age group from here, because then you actually see developmental differences. How many participants? Very, very important question. I think many developmental effects, at least in the area that I'm looking at, are not very strong. So think beforehand how many participants you actually have to test in order to get a significant difference. If you have to look at 500 infants, 12-month-old infants, don't do the study, okay? You have to get or think about realistic numbers. How many participants do you actually need to see a developmental difference? Because otherwise, don't really do the study. When do you recruit participants? Again, some advertisement for the stuff we have here. You might have heard about the Plymouth BabyLab. Claire and actually all of us are kind of associated with that. So BabyLab tests children here in the lab. You will see some of the setup a bit later on. Mainly infants and preschool children. We have the Plymouth SchoolLab, so we have a database of local schools that we can contact that have participated in research before, and we know that they are happy to participate in research. You might not be interested in looking at children and adolescents, but looking at the other end of the spectrum. You might want to look at older adults and how they think and behave. And you can recruit older adults through our psychology research database as well. So there are possibilities there. Again, if you have questions on how to recruit participants or how to recruit certain age groups, talk to us again and we can help you with that. Now, where should you test your participants? Again, we engage in two types of studies here. In the BabyLab, babies are usually, or infants are usually tested in the lab here. So parents bring their children in and they are tested for half an hour, sometimes longer. Now lab studies, what's good about that is you have your machines there if you have some complicated setup. And often lab studies have very high internal validity. That means you can control certain factors. They might be a bit more costly because you have to get the parents in, you have to pay them, you can only maybe test one child at a time. It takes longer to test the same number of children in the lab. Now field studies, I call them field studies now, you might test children at school. Sometimes the questions determine that if you want to look at classroom behavior, it makes sense to test children in actual classrooms in schools. Field studies have lower costs or take not as long because you can go there, you can test a larger number of children at the same time. But often there might be lower internal validity. You cannot control certain things. The schools might not be able to give you a space that is quiet enough. There is some distraction somewhere from other classmates. So think about these things when you plan your study. Measures. Claire is going to talk about in a couple of minutes some measures that we use here to test babies, children, adolescents. When you devise your measures, don't just use measures that have been used with adults. Obviously, children have certain limitations in terms of language, in terms of attention, in terms of what they can do. So please simplify your tasks. If you're not sure or if you're using a task that hasn't been used in the literature before, pilot test it. Very, very important. If you use a methodology that hasn't been used before and you don't pilot it and it doesn't work, then you might have to throw away your data afterwards. Not good, so please, really with developmental research, pilots are very, very important. It's false economy not to do pilots. Very importantly, how do you compensate your participants? When we test students here in our lab, so adults, we do compensate them. We give them course credit, we give them money. In the BabyLab, we pay kind of parents and children as well, or give them presents. When you go into schools or nurseries, you might want to think about compensation as well. Often the ethics committee doesn't like us paying children. We can pay schools sometimes. We can, for example, give the school some money. We can give them Amazon vouchers. We can give them other sorts of presents. But you might want to think about other types of compensation. So, for example, you might want to give schools access to resources we have at the university. So, for example, in the past, I worked with a secondary school, kind of ICT class and they wanted to have access to our cinema here, or our immersive vision theater, because they were making movies and they wanted to see it on the big screen. So you can facilitate that access, and schools are very happy when they get access to the university. They might want you to come in and give a talk about, I don't know, child development or adolescent risk-taking or whatever you are an expert in. Agree to do that because it really improves the relationship that you have with the school. I think in general, always think about the fact that especially schools, but also parents when they come to the BabyLab, are doing you a huge, huge, huge favor. They are spending their time voluntarily. They're giving you access to their children. They're organizing often the study for you. They are organizing a space for you. So you should be super respectful towards them, and you should be super grateful towards them. And what you should not do is to really burn your bridges with any schools or any parents. So please err on the side of politeness and gratitude if you want. So be really, really nice to your participants. Because word travels. If you've not been nice to a parent or not been nice to a school, for sure the school will not participate anymore in your research, but this word also travels, and we don't want that. We want to be nice to our participants. It's very important. So think about how you can show your gratitude to your participants, really. Any questions on that? Okay. Now, ethical issues. Julie talked about that, so I'm going to go through that relatively quickly. When we do research with children or minors, so people under the age of 16, we have to follow the British Psychological Society ethical code. You can find it here if you follow the link. And the BPS considers people under 16 years old as vulnerable persons. Other vulnerable persons are people, for example, with mental health problems or health problems, offenders, people in prison. And children or minors are also vulnerable people. Why? Mainly because testing them might pose additional risks to them or to us, so we need to install certain safeguards for our empirical studies. Now, one of the main risks that is associated with testing children is informed consent. As you know from Julie's ethical session, before we can test participants, we have to inform them about the study, and they have to tell us, yes, we are happy to participate in your study. We know what the study is about, we know what's happening to the data. Under these conditions, I'm happy to participate. Now with children, or generally people under the age of 16, we need informed consent from their parents. So we have to ask their parents, are you okay with your child participating in our study? When we're dealing with schools, you probably also need consent from the headmaster and from the teacher. And we also might want to ask our child participants whether they're actually happy to participate in the study as well. Now, when your participants are between 16 and 18 years old, instead, or in addition to getting informed consent from the parents or the legal guardian, you might want to get informed consent from themselves. The BPS considers them old enough to decide whether they want to participate in the study or not. Now, this is what Julie talked about. Information sheet for parents should contain the same information that you would give an adult participant. So information, what the study is about, what will happen to the child, whether the child has to take part or not, about the right to withdraw the child from the study, what's happening to the data, where is it stored, is it confidential, what are the risks associated with the research, and very importantly, can they contact you if they have any questions or if they want to withdraw the data later on. Now, we differentiate between two types of consent forms, opt-in and opt-out. Julie mentioned that again as well. Opt-in means that participants have to say, yes, I would like to participate in your research, and only then can they participate. Opt-out means you assume that they participate unless they say no. So only if people say no, only when people say no, I don't want to participate, then they're not part of your study. Otherwise, you consider them that they give consent. We should strive for opt-in, but sometimes for practical reasons we use opt-out. Practical reasons being that schools particularly say, I don't want to collect the informed consent sheets from 40, 50 child participants. I don't want to chase the children. We are using opt-out. The ethics committee accepts that if you can come up with a good reason. So we often use opt-out in schools because schools want us to do that. But if you can, use opt-in. And I think BabyLab uses opt-in as a rule. In general, whether you use opt-in or opt-out, give parents enough time to respond to the informed consent. So if you give the informed consent or information sheet the day before you start the study, not good enough. This will disappear in some school files, in whatever. Give parents at least 2 weeks to read the informed consent form, think about it, contact you if necessary, and opt in or opt out. Okay, so give parents enough time when you plan your study. You might want to ask the child participants whether they actually want to participate in the research. Now it's kind of hard to ask babies or infants because they clearly don't understand what the study might be about. But if your child is between 3 to 16 years old, you can tell them about the study. Don't just take them out of the classroom and do some tests on them. Ask them first, do they actually want to participate? Most children are very happy because our studies so far have been lots of fun. They're out of the classroom, they don't have to participate in math class, and so on. So they do want to take part in the study. But also make sure that they can say no. Remember, you are an authority person. You are this adult from the university and you take them out of the classroom in the library somewhere and ask them strange questions. So when you ask them for assent, tell them in as simple words as possible what the study is about, and also let them practice saying no. Children are very, very reluctant to say no to adults. So give them some warm-up questions before. Do you like math class? No. Do you like eating spinach? Whatever. Ask them a question where most children would logically say no, and then also ask them for their assent. It's important that if they do not want to participate, that they actually can say so. If you think that a child is drifting off while testing, that they don't want to participate anymore, also tell them beforehand it's okay to stop, it's okay to take a break, and hopefully children can take you up on that. Informed consent for 16 to 18-year-old participants, again, we do assume that they are mature enough to make decisions on their own behalf, not necessarily that their parents don't have to make decisions for them. So give them the same informed consent form as you would give adults as well. Now very quickly, when you do research with minors, Judy mentioned that as well, you need a DBS check, Disclosure and Barring Service check. It was called the CRB check before, different acronym now, same thing. Basically what you have to do is you have to apply, and I think the police looks at their database and sees whether you have any offenses that are dodgy, whether you're a child molester, whether you have been arrested for one sort or another. If you have something on your record, then chances are you will not be cleared. Your DBS check will not be cleared, and you will probably not be allowed to interact with children by yourself. Now there is a bit of discussion. You need a DBS check when you interact with children on a regular basis. So if you were a teacher or a nursery school, you would for sure need a DBS check. Because we might go to school like for 2 weeks in a year. It's sometimes not clear whether we actually do need a DBS check, but chances are apply for it if you want to do research with kids. If you have it, that's great, and there will be no problems with that. Any questions before I give over to Claire? Yes?
I was wondering, when I was working at schools, you weren't allowed to be somewhere with the child where it's just you and the child, and when it's experimental context, are there any kind of restrictions?
There used to be what we call an enhanced CRB check. An enhanced CRB check is police looks even further into your database, and if you have an enhanced CRB check, then you can be alone with the child. I think the same applies now for the DBS check. When you have a DBS check, you are allowed to be alone with the child. Now, in general, if I do research at school, I would make sure that, for example, if you are in a room with a child, leave the door open, for example, unless you really, need it soundproof or something like that. Make sure that other people can actually see you or could have access to the room where you are. Any, Laura? Marina? I think that...
Problems, you can always always get a room with the children on their own. Just a problem with the younger children, like 5-year-olds, they might not want to be with you on your own, because they don't know.
And also schools won't let you in general if you don't have a DBS.
Yeah, no.
So, even though you may not require it technically, they just won't let you in.
Yes.
So if you want to do developmental research, you need to get a DBS check in.
Yes, I always need to do the DBS check every time.
Any other questions? Okay. Claire, your turn.
That sounds intelligent. Okay, so more research. So now we're going to talk about what kind of measure we can do with babies and how we can actually test them in terms of technical technicalities. So you've already heard about how to do experiments with adults. So what kind of measure can we use? So for example, we can have speed of processing. So do you know any other measures that we can do with adults? Like speed of processing is a very abstract way of measuring things. Do you have any other idea? No? So we can be interested in recognition. So you show someone some stimuli and then you want to see whether you show these all stimuli with plenty of new ones and you want to see whether they recognize the object. So that's recognition. You can also do some identification. So that's what we usually do with, well, especially in neuropsychology, with dementia, you show them pictures and you want them to be able to identify it, so say that's a dog. So that's something that we can do with adults. Processing speed, you just show them stimuli and you record how quickly they will respond, and the speed at which they will respond will usually depend on the complexity of the stimuli or the complexity of the task. And finally, you can look a bit closer into the brain and do some neuroimaging or electrophysiology, and then you will have electrophysiological responses that are linked to what stimuli you have and to process. And how you do it? Most of the time we do it with motor responses, button presses. That's something we do like to do with adults because it's very cheap, very easy. We usually do get a good measure, kind of by the order of, let's say, milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, and it's quite reliable. Verbal motor responses, experimental psychologists don't really like to use verbal keys. So like you want to see how quickly they can identify a word, so, or an object, so they have to say the word or say the name of the object as quickly as possible, which means that you need to have a device that will detect when the sound is on. Well, when the person starts to speak. And if you start like, that will be taken as a response by the computer, but obviously that's not a response. So that is something that, at least with adults, we try to avoid. Why is there motor responses through? Oh yes, sorry, forgot. So if you want to do recognition, you can use the motor response. If you want to do identification, you can use either a verb or a motor response. If you want to test processing speed, then obviously you have to use finger responses. And if you want to evaluate electrophysiological markers, you will use EEG, fMRI, TMS, etc., etc. So that's what we can do with adults, which allows for a lot of variability and versatility in what we can measure. But with babies, can we do the same? Well, with babies or children, we have very different people actually. Especially with, for example, with pre-verbal children. Well, if they don't really have a proper articulated speech, they will not be able to give you the answer. They will not be able to tell you what they think. So obviously you need to find another way to kind of look into how they think without asking them. Speed of processing, that's if you want to use finger responses, and we've tried that with 4-year-olds, a go-no-go response is easy. They have to press a button only in one circumstance. They need a bit of training, but they can do it. With two handles, it just doesn't work, because first they get, no, they can do it, but so we tried it with just simple button boxes. They could do left or right very nicely. And then what we did is change the handles. They would have a tiny handle, big handle, and that was just getting them lost. They just couldn't do it just because the shape was different. Well, we do that with adults, it's just very easy. So you have to adapt to what you're asking the kids to do, and then how you can measure it with button responses. So, especially with young children under the age, let's say, of 3, don't try that. fMRI is very nice, it's very costly, but also it is invasive. So most of the time it's not allowed to do MRI with infants unless they are infants that have to do some MRI because they've had some problems when they were being born, so they want to evaluate the state of their brain. So, former PhD student from me is there. Yeah.
Why is MRI doing?
Well, because you have big magnets, and so you have lots of not electricity, but you have a lot of things going through your head. Obviously, they're not tangible, but they potentially can. We have no idea whether they can have any long-term effects on the baby's brain and neurons. So just in case, well, you can't do an MRI every day. So if you do experiments as a healthy adult, in theory, you only can do like 4 or 5 a year, because just in case it would have an effect. So it's just a measure of precaution. There is no proof that it is actually detrimental, but just in case, we try to limit that.
And for children, it's not like whole setup is kind of terrifying.
And it's very noisy. I mean, yeah.
But adults, like you can much better difference what is the reality and what is just.
But that's not the definition of invasive. Like invasive is something that you read into the body.
That goes into your body, and things do go into the body when you do MRI. So, unless you have the population that needs to do MRI, you won't do MRI with children. And there's a few experiments. That's the Nature paper that was published, but no one tried it in Nature. And in addition, babies or children have a very low attention span. Most of the time, if we test babies under, let's say, 2 years of age, our studies usually last for 5 minutes. And in 5 minutes, we do get a lot of information, but obviously it's still pretty limited. And young babies cannot be given any instructions. So you can't tell them, you're going to look at a picture, and when you see this, I want you to do this or that. So obviously, we have to make things very simple. And with children from the age of even from the age of 2 on, you can give them very simple instructions. And that's where I'm really away. So let's see whether the video works. So this method that is working very, really well with young infants. So it's called the head-turn preference paradigm, and like most of the things we do with babies, it's binary variable. So they either listen to one type of stimuli or the other one, and we are measuring how long they will listen to each category, and then see whether we find any difference. Usually we hope for a difference. It works very well. I mean, we have 2 studies that 5-month babies are just loving it. 18, well, they kind of love it, but how they will like this paradigm is very much depending on the type of stimuli. So if you try the same study at 18 months than you did at 5 months, they will be bored, because you made it very simple at 5 months. 18, they are already kind of very experts in language and stuff. So you have to make something much more complicated so that it keeps them interested. So that's one thing you really have to think about. Most of the time, just have a look at literature, see what people have done, and you know what you can expect to do. Usually, it's very dark room, so I mean, I've been here 4 years. I've tested probably at least 200 babies in just this setting. Only 2 babies didn't like it. One mum just couldn't do it because she hates black. So most babies just love it, and it's being in the dark with just these lights flashing makes it very simple, and then they're just don't panic about being in the dark, so that's really good. And we have to keep it very short in a way, because they still get bored very quickly. So we can do two types of experiments. One where we have a habituation, so you want to show them something new, and you want to see, for example, if they are able to generalize. So you will play them with one type of stimuli for a little bit, until they've listened long enough. So long enough is up to interpretation, obviously. And you think that, for example, by 45 seconds, they will have a good idea about what this sounds like. And then you go on to the test phase, where you will alternate between these old type of stimuli and a new type of stimuli. And you want to see whether in this test phase, they will actually notice the difference. And if they do, they will look differently for one condition over the other. And if you just do discrimination, you can just take two conditions, it's always binary, so just take two types of stimuli and just alternate them from the beginning and see how it goes. So for example, we've done that with babies' names. So we were either playing them the name, so Lucy, 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 or the alternative was a mispronunciation on the first phoneme, so Moosey, 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 and we wanted to see whether they would actually hear the difference. And that works pretty well. Next method that works, well, I'd say that it works from the age of 12, but the IPR, preferential looking paradigm, works. I mean, we have a study running at 6 months, and I just love it just the same. What we do is we have a big TV screen where we show most of the time pairs of pictures. So the trial starts with 2 pictures shown, and then there's a voiceover saying, look, cat. And what we are interested in is eye movement. We want to see we want to see how quickly or for how long they will look at the cat after they heard, look, cat. So this is a method that we really like to use here because well, we can do more than binary variables. We can do quite a few trials because they usually last about 5 seconds, so you can stack them up. It's watching pictures, so babies like that most of the time. And then we have fun coding the data and looking at the cute babies' faces afterwards, so that's fun as well. Another one that we're going to show you later is a bit more fancy than this. IPL is the eye tracker, so you may have done, well, if you've done experiments as particle experimental, you may have done that. So it's infrared cameras that are usually mounted below a computer screen or on your head. With babies, it's on the screen. And it's, they just do interpolations and they can see whether, depending on pupil position, the computer can just estimate where you're looking on the screen very precisely and for how long, etc. etc. So it's pretty good. It gives you most of the time amazing data, but amazing data with babies can be a bit tricky because babies move. That's that's my nephew. We did this experiment in parallel in Paris, and Parisian babies can't sit on mom's lap. In here, we tried, it was just impossible. So we had to have him sit on the car seat next to mommy, and that was the only way we could have them sit for a few minutes. So it's really good because you can then play back and see exactly where the baby is looking. So this is word learning task. So the lady keeps speaking like, this is a mug, this is a mug, this is a mug. Look at the mug, that's a lovely mug. And we want to see if they can learn these minimal pairs. So 2 words that just differentiate. They are different by a very tiny little difference. So that is very nice because it's very precise. It's, as long as you have something that is shown on the screen, you can do anything. And the good thing is, this is like the IPL and actually like the Hector, these are non-verbal measures. So spontaneously, if you see something complicated or if you see something interesting, you will look at the object. And you will look longer at the object if it's a very new, attractive thing, it's very shiny, or if it's, for example, a word you have to learn, or if the lady tells you, look at the map, then you will look at the map. So you don't have to give them any, well, we do give them instructions in the voiceover, look at the cat, not, so that they're good enough, they do it. But we don't have, for example, to have them to point at something which is something that is way more valuable. So it's very nice. You can do anything, and the more entertaining you do it, videos work usually better than just static images. You can test almost anything, because, you know, the eyes are a good window on what we think. So we usually look where we're interested. So, yeah, that's very useful. Another one is if you want to collect response time. So you can use simple one button kind of response, or you can use 2 buttons. But like Michaela said, do pilot, because you may anticipate things or what kids can do, and sometimes they can't. And final, well, not actually, one, but last kind of method is the big, there's a category which are face-to-face interactions. And in this you can have hundreds of paradigms. So usually, well, by face-to-face it means that the experimenter will talk a little bit more than in the previous methods. That's the wrong one. And you will ask something from the child. So in this one, it's some kind of, let's say, vocabulary test. The baby girl is presented with 3 pictures, and the first one, she has to point at the name that the experimenter is saying. So I think this one is a cat. And then she has to name one of the remaining pictures. So it can be pretty tricky, because you need the child to interact with you. So you need some time to get cozy with the child, so that the child is actually not shy anymore and is happy to talk to you, interact with you. That sometimes takes a little while. And obviously they can get bored very quickly, so you have to be good in making sure they're always happy. Obviously if they're bored, they will just stop doing it, so you can't force them to do it, but sometimes they just need redirection. I mean, that's why parents are useful. Usually it's the parents who are just force the children to keeping up, and they are saying like, no, it really seems like your child has had enough, we're just going to stop. So sometimes we have to fight against the parents who really want their kids to perform. So, yeah, and that's the thing with working with children. It's not about doing well, so don't make any judgments about how well the kids, or how well they did it is whether they were happy till the end. Or even if they started to be unhappy, I guess they were happy for a little bit. So that's the definition of good when you give feedback to the parents. So everyone has to be happy, entertained, and especially not judged, if not just positively. So that's very critical. Parents are just hungry for that. And those babies actually are awesome, so it's not lying at all. So yeah, so you can always play a little bit of game. If the child needs a bit of distraction for 2 minutes, you can play with something else and then go back on the task. So it's a bit more difficult to control exactly what's happening, because since you're talking, the baby has more distraction. So it's a bit harder to say exactly the same things to every kid, because you have to adapt to the situation. But still, you can get pretty good measures. Another kind of face-to-face interactions, that's something that Michaela has done quite extensively. You want to see how children will judge stories where things happen. So for example, in this one, the girl holding the crayons is, let's say, called Mary, and the other girl, Hannah, just wants to borrow some pens. She wants the blue pen, so she asks Mary if she can have a pen. Mary says no. How do you think Mary feels? So if you ask the children to say something, to make a judgment about this story, it can be pretty hard. First of all, usually around the age of 3.5, they are very shy, so they won't talk to you. They will sometimes whisper to mommy, but you don't have a very spontaneous verbal response. Another trick is just to ask them to point at the face they think characterizes the state of Mary. Obviously we don't say it like that, and this way, pointing or just acting is usually easier than saying. I mean, even for us, just most of the time producing verbal responses can be a bit tricky because we know things, we don't necessarily know why things are like they are. So that's something that is very useful to do. Try to avoid verbal responses, or try with this one and then have a verbal response, because then they obviously can elaborate more if they want to say more. And then just verbal judgments. Observations. So that's the one thing where I would actually avoid going, but it's something where you gather actually tremendous information. So you just observe what children are doing, and you have to describe it as precisely as possible. You can do that at any age, and you will usually have a list of behaviors you are interested in, so what you are interested in. So it's nice to have a list. Well, it's actually essential that you have a list, because otherwise you can get carried away and just miss the important things. So have you used it? Yeah, you do. But I would just go now. I like easier measures. And so we said, so fMRI is invasive, but there is good alternative, which is called NIRS, so it's near infrared spectrography. Yes, that's the one. So it is like a mini MRI. You just put, it's just some kind of cap that you put on child's head, and it's just light going through, and the reflection of this infrared light will be different whether your blood is oxygenated or not. Because that's the idea. If you're thinking very hard in one bit, your brain needs more sugar, more oxygen, and that does reflect in these kind of potentials. The good thing is, especially if you're working with newborns, is you don't need attention. So you can just play sound and see how passively the brain will react to the sounds you're playing, for example. You can do it when the baby is sleeping, because obviously the brain is always working and taking information. And well, you can have good ideas about how the brain of an infant does react to the stimuli. But that's obviously knowing that the brain does vary massively between, obviously before they're born, and let's say between the moment they're born and 3 years. The organization of the brain changes a lot. So you obviously you can't just transpose what you observe with a newborn with what you would observe with an adult. But the good thing is, it's totally non-invasive, and it looks a bit scary, but the baby doesn't see that. Another one that is used here in Plymouth, EEG are really nice. With babies, I would say if they're not walking yet, that's the best age to do it, because then if they don't walk, they're slightly more likely to sit tight for 20 minutes. If they just want to walk, if they're bored, they have the way out, which is walking. So then you need to make the experiment very, very captivating. And the good thing is, depending on what you study, you don't necessarily need attention. If you're going for the old paradigm, you don't need attention. That's really nice. Or otherwise, with all the children, you just show them pictures, and you have to make sure, for example, they're not moving, because virtual artifacts are just messing up your data. But if you keep it simple, much more simple than you would do EEG with adults, you can go up to 20 minutes, but that is already very, very long. So if you want to do EEG with children, think even more carefully, because even if the babies are sitting tight, you will still lose loads of data, which means you may lose and loads of babies, and since you're limited in the number of trials, you may lose many babies. So think carefully about what you're going for and how you can actually test it. So if you want to do that, talk to Jeremy, he's the one. Often with adults, when you do EEG, we have these extraphysical measures, and we also ask for a verbal response. First, because we don't want the person to just fall asleep and ignore what you are showing to them. You still want them to process the stimuli. So the best way to make sure they do is to ask them to do a task on the subject that they see. With children, it's much harder, so that's why you have to keep things very simple, because they're just because of the fact that it's very hard for them to give pattern responses, and doing it like 100 times, they won't do it. So you need to have maybe less verbal responses, motor responses, but still keep them interested. So that's actually quite a feat. Again, that's why it's nice when attention is not needed, because they will still do the task, but can just calmly do something else. And that's about this. That's the list of reference. I guess there's a way to share it with you. So it's just, let's say, reference papers on different methods, and that's a bit more self-promotion. So it's things that have been done here at the BabyLab. If you want to do this or that, just talk to anyone, and they would be able to tell you, okay, you should talk to that person or that person. But we're always very happy to have new ideas, especially if it's slightly less verbal, because the BabyLab, they're a bit bored. Because, well, not bored, but it's just like, oh, it's always language. And it's like, wait till your baby's 4, then they will do something about moral development. And so, if you want to do something earlier, that's even better, actually. Thank you.